G'day, friends. Miloa here. I am so excited to be here today with Mark Pickett. We're going to be talking about his book, Corsair and the Sky Pirates, and I am super excited to dive into the story and get to talk to Mark. Mark, welcome. Tell us about yourself and the world that you've created.
Well, to talk about myself first, I'm originally from a small town in New Jersey, Phillipsburg, New Jersey. I'm also a 23-year veteran of the United States Navy.
Thank you
Uh,
for your
did a
service.
Thank you very much. I did 4 tours on different aircraft carriers. Traveled around the world pretty much during my career, up and down the East Coast for the most part. But after 23 years, during that time, I was a Navy journalist, more or less, so writing has been a part of my DNA for the most part for all that time. And so during that time, I spent a lot of that time, especially uh, developing stories and things in my head a lot. Uh, Especially when you're deployed at sea, you can have a lot of free time. And in my younger days, in my youth, I spent a lot of time playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Hmm.
You get a lot of that when you don't have, especially in the '80s where you didn't have email, internet, video games, things like that. So I had a very fluid of that imagination, being able to build up and things, and so I was able to work on, during my last deployment, I actually is where I started writing my first story, and it was published. My first one, Forever Avalon, was published in 2009, and since then I've published about 10 books between self-published and with through a small press publisher, Curious Corvid Publishing, out of Geneva, Ohio. I have a series. My Forever Avalon series has 4 books in it. I have another series, a steampunk fantasy series called The Last Magus. And Corsair and the Sky Pirates is actually my first full-on steampunk historical fiction. So that's pretty much about me. I work at right now. I'm still full-time employed. Unfortunately, being a writer doesn't pay the bills yet. I work as a writer editor actually for the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington D.C.
Cool. That sounds like a fascinating job that you have. So let's talk about your book. So, what first sparked the idea for Corsair and the Sky Pirates?
Well, actually, I've always loved steampunk. It's been kind of something I've always wanted to really get into, but haven't really been able to at first. And then, I just saw a thing for a steampunk short story contest,
Mm,
and so I wanted to come up with an idea for it. So, I was just looking through some different things, trying to come up with something, and the idea just hit me: is what if Nikola Tesla and Jules Verne met? What would the world have been like out of that collaboration? So that was where the concept came from. And so then I started doing my research. And then the funny thing was is that I really discovered that Tesla was actually working for Continental Edison in Paris in 1883. And of course, Verne was alive and living in his home in France at that time.
mhm,
So technically, they could have met. So, you just take the impossible and make it possible in that sense, and just try to build from that meeting and just build a whole world from that. And so, creating the world from that collaboration and creating this just technological marvels that could have come out of it.
mhm,
But then you had to create something else. What would have created this bounty of technology? And then I came up with adding more of a sci-fi element, and that's where I created the comet of Uriel, a comet that was dropping these meteorites that had a new element that was dropping it in all fragments that was littering the planet. And these fragments were basically where you put them in water, they generated heat without reducing the element in size. So therefore, we were creating steam without losing any energy. And so there you had it. You were creating a environment of where you had constant steam, and then Tesla could just go wild, and then
mhm,
just went from there. Because the whole idea of steampunk, of course, is taking modern technology back to the Victorian area powered by steam. So
mhm,
then just went through with the technology from there.
So, digging a little bit deeper into Nikola Tesla and Jules Verne, what made you come up with the idea to throw them into the same room?
Well, I think, when you think of Verne, to many of us steampunk authors, he is the godfather of steampunk
Mhm,
because he came up. I mean, you look at the Nautilus. I mean, especially as a sailor myself, the Nautilus is just a technological marvel in its design that he thought of that invention years before nuclear
mhm,
submarines.
mhm,
And when you see that and you think of that technology and what it meant to create that, and so taking that idea and then bringing a new element into it, the element of someone like Tesla, who had the ideas and the technological background that he could take Verne's imagination and expand upon it.
mhm.
And like I said, putting those two things together, you could create such technology that could just bring about a new age. And that's what I wanted to do in this book.
So it's like having this big melting pot and you threw in all these ingredients and what came out is Corsair and the Sky Pirates.
Exactly. And then of course, when you throw Edison into the mix because of course you couldn't have Tesla without the war
Mhm,
that he had with Edison. So
mhm.
bringing those two together in their combatant style, you wanted to create that conflict. This is just adding more to it.
Yeah. I think my favorite part about being an author and writing is always asking the what if questions. You know,
Yes, absolutely.
what if this and that happened at the same time? How would that change things?
Absolutely. And again, I'm introducing new elements and new characters, but at the same time, you want to preserve the history and also introduce more of the history to readers.
Mhm, mhm. What was the most challenging part that you had about building this whole technological steampunk environment?
Well, I think that for me, the most challenging was the fact that I'm not an engineer,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
you have to create the technology. And I mean, I had to come up with, you can take some things from modern times and take it back there because some of it was early on. When you think about computers, there were early data
mhm,
processing back in those times that you can just modernize it a little bit and make it more of what we would consider a computer. But I also wanted to try to bring about things, something new and a little bit different. I had to create what I called a radiographic frequency modulator, which was my version of an internal radar, more or less.
mhm,
It was a device that was plugged into a ship's electrical system, an airship's electrical system that the pirates use to the where it sends takes the electrical system and uses it like an internal radar that projects an image of what's using the electrical currents around the ship. Tells them what's going on in the ship, where people are, by the electrical impulses
mhm,
and things. And I just made it up. It was just something to create, but I had to create kind of figure out the technology of how that would work.
mhm,
The
mhm,
same with using atmospheric condensers to pull in not only water from the atmosphere to help the airships generate their own fresh water for not only the steam generation but for them to drink, but at the same time using the atmosphere to generate help us using static electricity to recharge the batteries. These are things I had to try to figure out the engineering aspects of it
mhm.
just to try to, to make things sound logical and to make them work.
So I am an engineer by trade, by background. And so I think that's why I'm always so drawn to steampunk to begin with, is because of all the engineering and all the aspects and the
Mhm.
unique worlds that you can build around it. And so in the series that you thank you so much for reviewing Broken Wings. And what I tried to do there was to create Imagineering which is the combination of magic and engineering all into one.
Yes,
And
I love that concept in your book.
and so, but the key requirement that I made in the book is that even though there is magic, it still has to adhere to scientific principles.
Exactly.
So you cannot just, randomly have a fireball appear in the middle of nowhere. So I play very, very heavily off of the concept of conservation of energy. That energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed from one state to another.
Hmm.
And so that whole concept is how I build my steampunk world. In that, yes, magic can make stuff happen, and yes, engineering and steam can make stuff happen, but they all have to play by the same laws. Um, and so that's what I loved to do and created.
I
I
tried to get
that book.
around it a little bit, primarily through this new element, because it's an element, the pieces, the fragments of the comet Uriel. My idea is that it's an unknown element. It's an element
Mhm.
from outside our solar system that was traveling on through a comet. So
Yeah.
it's something that's unknown, and so it's still something that needed to be studied, and that's was part of the mystery behind it.
Yeah, and because it's an unknown, you can make it behave however you want to make it behave, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that's
Exactly.
definitely a very unique solution to the same problem.
Yes.
All right. So can you tell me a little bit more about Corsair?
Well, Corsair is my mystery, my little mystery wrapped in an enigma. He is, his real name is unknown. Well, until you get to the end of the book, you will eventually find out what his real name is. But for the most part, you only know him as Corsair because
Mhm.
the truth behind him is it could get a lot of people killed, including his crew and others that know the truth behind
Okay.
who he really is. But the thing behind him is that is the passion of the man who he is. He's, somebody from the outback who's raised in the outback of Australia and who has traveled from one end of the world to the other, and he's seen injustice
Mm,
in many forms, and he has seen it through different eyes, and that's why he's decided to follow Tesla's dream of a world where technology is used for the benefit of all and not for only those who can pay the highest price.
mhm,
And
mhm,
that's why he's following Tesla's dream in that sense. And so he's brought together the very best crew that he can to try to fulfill that.
mhm. And so that journey and that fulfillment, that's also building the tension in the story.
Exactly. Exactly it is. And it's going to even lead to more as the story progresses into the sequels and things down the road, because I've already written book 2 and there's definitely more to come in this.
Excellent. So what's your writing process like?
Well, I'll be honest with you. When I wrote my first book, I did it off the cuff. I had the idea in my head and I just started writing and writing and I just went with it. And I just wrote as things came to me. But after I wrote my first book, I kind of realized that I can't write that way all the time.
Mm,
So, and also, when I wrote my first book, I was in my early late 30s, early 40s, and now I'm in my 60s. So I kind of can't do that anymore. My mind is not the way it used to be.
mhm,
So I've kind of gotten to the point where I am more of a person who does outlines, and I do character sheets, references on, especially when I'm dealing with uh, more so my fantasy writing. I do more of references for characters, for places, cities, countries, languages, races, everything. I lay it all out in everything in my outlines and everything. Do a story outline, and then I start writing things out, With steampunk, it's a little bit different. I still do my characters and things like and my outlines and such, but it's a lot more dedicated to the historical research because you really have to know the not only the characters and the places, but the timeline, what's going on at that time.
Mm.
You really want to make sure that you're accurate to the what's going on within that time period because you don't want to be messing too much with history. You can, I think, with historical fiction,
Mhm.
you can cross things a little bit, but you don't want to do it too much where you're stepping out of bounds.
So for me, that's where I leaned more into the sci-fi than I did into the historical fiction. So my steampunk actually takes place on a completely different planet.
Right.
But I still have all the elements of steampunk. It's just that I don't have to worry about the historical accuracy of what's going on in the time frame. But yeah, it's fascinating to me how two authors can write in a similar genre, but have different ways of solving the problems that that genre faces.
No,
Um,
absolutely. And it's the thing I think the thing with steampunk is it just depends on your approach to it. I mean,
mhm,
whether you take it from that as long as you have the technological aspect within that, I you can call it steampunk.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and some cultural elements as well. I
Yeah,
kind of feel,
absolutely yes,
you
as well.
know,
Yes, absolutely.
like the way they talk, I mean, like they won't talk in slang, but full complete sentences and those sorts of
And I
things.
think appearance as well. Looking
Mhm.
at the like
Yes.
looking at your in your book the stylization of
Yes.
the covers, the military uniforms, and some of the things, and that was very to me very steampunk.
Yeah, I was very deliberate when I was choosing those elements, and making sure that when you picked up the cover, you'd instantly know, that it was gonna be a steampunk story. But that's great.
Mhm.
There's an interesting tension in your story that I wanna talk a little bit more about between the intention to use the technology for good, but then the opposite is invention for profit. So can you tell me a little bit more about how that plays out?
Well, I really wanted to touch on a lot of modern ideology and bring it to that era, I think. Because I was thinking when I was writing this book, I was thinking a lot of what's going on in the world today when you're
Mhm,
thinking about the problems of racism, when you're thinking about the problems of the climate, when you're thinking about the problems of corporate greed. You know, when you think about it today, a lot of that was also going on back then.
mm.
And it just you don't have the of course you don't have the social media aspect of today, to talk about things, but a lot of it is the same problems were going on back then, but I think it was not as much in your face back then as it is today. But I think we still need to address those things. So
Mhm,
that's why I wanted to put it a little bit forward in my book the way I did. That's the way why I did with Corsair's crew. I made his crew the way they were because I wanted to show a crew that was of so diverse and yet so united in the way they were. And
yeah.
I wanted to show the corporate greed
Mhm,
of people like, of Edison and of the corporations that he brought together under his ERP corporation, those
mhm,
corporate giants and the other corporate uh, um, robber barons, for lack of a
mhm,
better term, that he brought that were around at that time. I mean, and I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing for people to make money. That's not what I'm saying. But there has to be that balance. That's what I'm
mhm.
trying to really say
I
in a lot of that. I think Tesla was
Mhm,
trying to do that. I really think Tesla was trying to do that. I mean, he was making money under Westinghouse. He wasn't giving the stuff away, but he was doing it responsibly, I think.
mhm.
And he
Yeah.
was trying to do it the right way. and such. And I think that's what I'm just trying to show in my book.
Yeah. I mean, there's a difference between making money the responsible way and then making money by exploiting others. Um,
Yes.
and those are two completely different characters to deal with. Yeah. So a couple of fun questions I have for you is if you had your own airship in real life, what would you name it and what would its specialty be?
Wow, that's a really tough one. Um, oof. You know what? If I would always have to harken back to my Navy days and name it Enterprise because that's not just from the Trekkie
Mhm.
in me. It's not, but
Mhm.
it is also that was my I think that was the best carrier that I ever served on.
Cool.
It was and was one of the best tours of duty I had. So it definitely would have to name it Enterprise and it especially would just be defending the home front. That's what because that's what Enterprise has done through history.
Well, great. It was wonderful talking with you today. And if you readers want to know more about Mark Pigott and Corsair and the Sky Pirates, please check the link in the description below, where you'll be directed to his website and you can read all about it and find out where to buy the book. Thank you so much for everybody for watching, and as always, happy reading.